December 8, 1941, 12:30 p.m. The steps of the United States Capitol. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt sits in the back of a black Cadillac, preparing to address Congress about the attack on Pearl Harbor. The infamous speech that would change American history. But there's something the cameras don't show, something the history books barely mention. The car protecting the President of the United States may have belonged to America's most notorious gangster. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Al Capone's armored Cadillac. 7,000 pounds of steel, bulletproof glass, and criminal engineering. A fortress on wheels that once carried the most wanted man in America. And on the most dangerous day in modern presidential history, it might have been the only thing standing between Franklin Roosevelt and an assassin's bullet. This shouldn't have been possible. The President of the United States riding in a mobster's car? The Secret Service using criminal technology to protect democracy? But December 7, 1941 changed everything. Pearl Harbor shattered America's sense of safety. And suddenly, the federal government needed protection they didn't have from a source they'd never consider. This is the untold story of how Al Capone's death machine became FDR's secret shield. How a $30,000 gangster luxury became a symbol of national security. And how the most unlikely partnership in American history happened in plain sight. But here's what nobody tells you about that December morning. The story isn't just about a car. It's about desperation, improvisation, and the moment when national security trumped moral purity. Because when democracy itself was under threat, even the president's protectors were willing to use the devil's tools. Chicago, 1928. Al Capone was at the height of his power. Bootlegging, gambling, prostitution, and murder had made him the most feared man in America. But fear cuts both ways. Every rival gang, every federal agent, every ambitious young hood wanted Alphonse Capone dead. So Capone did what any smart businessman would do. He invested in security. The 1928 Cadillac V8 Town sedan. $5,000 retail price. Beautiful machine. Chrome bumpers, leather interior, powerful engine. But Capone didn't want beautiful. He wanted bulletproof. So he had it modified. The Cadillac went to a custom shop on Chicago's South Side. Mechanics stripped it down, reinforced every panel. They installed 3-inch thick bulletproof glass. Not the thin stuff you see in modern cars. Real armor glass, manufactured for banks and government buildings. Windows that could stop a Thompson submachine gun at point-blank range. The body panels got similar treatment. Steel plating layered underneath the original metal. The doors alone weighed 200 pounds each. The rear compartment was completely enclosed, separated from the driver by another bulletproof barrier. Al Capone could ride in complete isolation, protected from bullets, bombs, and betrayal. But the real genius was in the details. The gas tank was armored and self-sealing. Puncture it, and it would heal itself. The tires were solid rubber, impossible to flatten. The engine compartment was reinforced to protect against grenades. Every inch of that Cadillac was designed with one purpose: keeping Al Capone alive in a world where everyone wanted him dead. The final touch? A siren and police lights. Not for decoration. Capone's motorcade could part traffic like a presidential convoy. Police officers who didn't know better would snap to attention, thinking official government business was passing by. The irony was suffocating. America's most wanted criminal riding around Chicago in a car that looked more official than the mayor's. The total cost? Somewhere between $25,000 and $30,000. In 1928 money, that's roughly $400,000 today. You could buy a mansion for what Capone spent on bulletproofing one car. But to Capone, it was cheap insurance. Dead gangsters don't spend money. FBI surveillance reports from 1929 describe the Cadillac in detail. Agents had been tracking Capone's movements, documenting his vehicles, building a case. Special Agent Melvin Purvis wrote, "Subject's primary vehicle appears purpose-built for urban warfare. Observation suggests extensive armor modifications. Vehicle represents significant security challenge for potential apprehension." That's federal speak for, we can't touch him in that thing. The car became Capone's mobile headquarters. He'd hold meetings in the back seat while driving through Chicago. Associates would report in, receive orders, deliver payments. The Cadillac was more than transportation. It was a symbol of power, invincibility, untouchability. Chicago Tribune reporter Jake Lingle, who covered Capone extensively before his own murder in 1930, described riding in the Cadillac during a rare interview. "You feel like you're inside a bank vault. The windows are so thick everything looks slightly distorted. The silence is complete. Outside noise just disappears. It's like riding in a different world." That different world was exactly what Capone needed. Because by 1929, that world was collapsing around him. The St. Valentine's Day massacre changed everything. February 14, 1929. 7 members of Bugs Moran's North Side Gang gunned down in a Chicago garage. The brutality shocked the nation. Suddenly, Al Capone wasn't just a bootlegger. He was a symbol of everything wrong with America. President Herbert Hoover made Capone's capture a personal priority. He ordered federal agencies to coordinate tax evasion, income tax violations, anything that would stick. The heat was coming down, and even the armored Cadillac couldn't protect Capone from federal investigators with unlimited resources and political pressure. On June 16, 1931, Al Capone was indicted on tax evasion charges. 22 counts, covering income from 1925 to 1929. The government claimed he owed $215,000 in back taxes. Capone's lawyers negotiated, tried to cut a deal. No dice. The feds wanted him finished. October 17, 1931. Chicago Federal Courthouse. Judge James Herbert Wilkerson sentenced Al Capone to 11 years in federal prison, fines totaling $80,000, and court costs of $30,000. At 32 years old, America's most notorious gangster was finished. And with Capone's conviction came the seizure of his assets. Properties, businesses, bank accounts, and vehicles. Everything the federal government could identify and prove was purchased with criminal proceeds, including one 1928 Cadillac V8 sedan, 7,000 pounds of armored luxury, now property of the United States Treasury Department. The Treasury had a problem. What do you do with a gangster's armored car? It was too expensive to destroy, too notorious to sell, too dangerous to ignore. So they did what government bureaucrats do with unusual assets. They stored it. The Cadillac went to a Treasury Department motor pool in Washington, D.C. parked between standard government vehicles, covered with a tarp, forgotten by everyone except the mechanics who occasionally started the engine to keep it running. For 10 years, Al Capone's fortress on wheels sat gathering dust in a government garage. Until December 7, 1941. December 7, 1941, 7:48 a.m. Hawaiian Standard Time. Pearl Harbor Naval Base, Oahu. The first wave of Japanese aircraft appeared over the harbor like a swarm of metal hornets. Dive bombers, torpedo planes, fighters. 353 aircraft carrying death from a clear blue sky. The attack lasted 2 hours. When the smoke cleared, 18 ships were sunk or damaged. 2,400 Americans were dead. 1,100 more wounded. The USS Arizona had exploded like a volcano, taking 1,177 sailors with her. America's Pacific Fleet was crippled. But the real target wasn't just military. It was psychological. Japan had proven that America wasn't untouchable, that the continental United States wasn't safe, that even the most powerful democracy in the world could be hurt. President Roosevelt received the first reports at 1:40 p.m. Eastern Time. He was having lunch at the White House with advisor Harry Hopkins when Navy Secretary Frank Knox called with preliminary details. Roosevelt's first words, according to Hopkins' diary, "This means war." But declaring war meant addressing Congress. And addressing Congress meant leaving the White House. And leaving the White House, on the day after Pearl Harbor, meant entering the most dangerous environment a president had faced since Abraham Lincoln. Here's what you have to understand about December 8, 1941. America was in panic. Nobody knew if Pearl Harbor was the beginning of a larger attack. Were Japanese submarines off the West Coast? Were German agents preparing sabotage operations? Was this the start of an invasion? Intelligence reports flooding into Washington suggested multiple threats. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover had been tracking suspected Axis agents for months. The Office of Naval Intelligence reported unusual radio activity along the eastern seaboard. Army intelligence was investigating sabotage at defense plants. And in the middle of this chaos, President Roosevelt had to travel from the White House to the Capitol building to address Congress. 1.5 miles through downtown Washington, past office buildings, hotels, apartments. Thousands of potential hiding spots for assassins, saboteurs, anyone wanting to complete what Japan had started. Secret Service Chief Frank Wilson had a nightmare scenario on his hands. The President of the United States, during the most dangerous moment in modern American history, had to make a public appearance with minimal security preparation. Wilson's problem was simple. The Secret Service wasn't ready for wartime. In 1941, presidential security was minimal compared to modern standards. No bulletproof limousines. No advanced teams sweeping every building. No communication networks coordinating multiple agencies. The Secret Service was designed to protect against lone gunmen and publicity seekers, not coordinated enemy attacks. Roosevelt's normal vehicle was a 1939 Lincoln convertible. Beautiful car, impressive presence, absolutely zero protection against bullets. The canvas top might stop rain. It wouldn't stop a .22 caliber bullet, much less a rifle round. Wilson called an emergency meeting. Secret Service agents, White House security, Metropolitan Police. How do you protect the president when war has just started and nobody knows what's coming next? The options were limited. Cancel the speech? Impossible. Congress and the American people needed to hear from their president. Move the speech to the White House. The Constitution requires a joint session of Congress to meet at the Capitol. Sneak Roosevelt in through tunnels? There weren't any direct connections. That's when someone remembered the Cadillac. The exact identity of who suggested using Capone's car remains disputed among historians. Some accounts credit Secret Service agent Mike Riley. Others say it was Chief Wilson himself. Treasury Department records from December 8, 1941 are classified, and many participants never spoke publicly about the decision. What we know for certain is this. Sometime between 6 p.m. on December 7th and 6 a.m. on December 8th, someone in the federal government authorized the use of a seized criminal asset to protect the President of the United States. Agent Mike Riley later wrote in his memoir, Riley of the White House, about the security challenges of December 8th. We needed armor protection, and we needed it immediately. There wasn't time to modify the president's normal vehicle or locate alternatives through official channels. Someone remembered that Treasury had been storing unusual vehicles seized from criminal prosecutions. The Treasury Motor Pool received orders to prepare the Capone Cadillac for immediate presidential use. Mechanics who hadn't touched the car in years suddenly found themselves cleaning, fueling, and inspecting 7,000 pounds of gangster engineering. The irony wasn't lost on anyone involved. Al Capone, the man who'd made a mockery of federal law for over a decade, had inadvertently provided the federal government with exactly what it needed: military-grade protection disguised as civilian transportation. But using the car created new problems. First, authentication. Was this actually Al Capone's personal vehicle? Treasury records showed the car had been seized during asset forfeiture proceedings following Capone's conviction. The VIN matched FBI surveillance reports from 1929 to 1930. Multiple witnesses had identified this specific Cadillac as Capone's primary transportation. Second, condition. The car had been sitting for 10 years. Tires, battery, fluids, mechanical systems. Everything needed inspection and potential replacement. Treasury mechanics worked through the night of December 7th to 8th, ensuring the vehicle would function reliably. Third, secrecy. Using a notorious gangster's car to protect the president would be a public relations disaster if discovered. The decision was classified immediately. Only essential personnel were informed. Even Roosevelt himself may not have been told the car's history until after the speech. By 6 a.m. on December 8th, the Cadillac was ready. Black paint polished to mirror shine. Chrome bumpers reflecting morning light. 7,000 pounds of armored luxury waiting outside the Treasury building. But here's the detail that makes this story truly remarkable. The car worked perfectly. 10 years of storage hadn't degraded its effectiveness. The bulletproof glass was still clear. The armor plating showed no rust or weakness. The engine started immediately and ran smoothly. Al Capone's engineers had built something so well that a decade of government neglect couldn't destroy it. At 11:45 a.m., President Roosevelt left the White House for the Capitol. The normal Lincoln convertible led the motorcade, creating the appearance of routine presidential transportation. But directly behind it, carrying the actual President of the United States, was a fortress built by America's most notorious criminal. The drive from the White House to the Capitol took 12 minutes. 12 minutes during which Franklin Roosevelt sat in a car designed to protect Al Capone from Tommy guns and assassination attempts. 12 minutes during which the president's safety depended on engineering specifications developed by Chicago mob mechanics. And it worked flawlessly. 12:30 p.m., December 8, 1941. The armored Cadillac pulled up to the east entrance of the Capitol building. Secret Service agents flanked the vehicle as President Roosevelt was transferred to his wheelchair and wheeled into the building. The joint session of Congress was packed. Senators, representatives, cabinet members, Supreme Court justices, military leadership. Gallery seats filled with press and distinguished guests. Everyone who mattered in American government was in that chamber. At 12:30 p.m., President Roosevelt began speaking. His voice carried across the chamber and, through radio, across the nation. Yesterday, December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The speech lasted 6.5 minutes. Roosevelt detailed the attacks, the casualties, the unprovoked nature of Japanese aggression. He asked Congress to declare that a state of war existed between the United States and Japan. The House voted 388 to 1 for war. The Senate voted 82 to 0. America was officially at war for the first time since 1917. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. But while history focused on Roosevelt's words, security focused on getting him safely back to the White House. The return trip used the same procedure. Lincoln convertible leading, armored Cadillac carrying the president. The operation was a complete success. No incidents, no threats, no security breaches. Roosevelt delivered the most important speech of his presidency and returned safely to the White House. And throughout the entire operation, the Capone Cadillac performed exactly as designed. Bulletproof glass clear. Armor plating solid. Engine running perfectly. Al Capone's fortress on wheels had successfully protected the President of the United States during one of the most dangerous days in American history. What happened next reveals how government bureaucracy handles embarrassing necessities. The Cadillac was immediately returned to the Treasury motor pool. Official records of its use were classified. Participants were instructed not to discuss the operation publicly. As far as the government was concerned, President Roosevelt had traveled to the Capitol in standard official transportation. But secrets have a way of leaking, especially secrets involving celebrities, presidents, and gangsters. The first public mention appeared in a 1943 Chicago Tribune article by reporter Walter Winchell. Winchell claimed unnamed sources had told him about the car's use, but he presented it as rumor rather than confirmed fact. The White House neither confirmed nor denied the story. In 1950, former Secret Service agent Mike Riley published his memoir, Riley of the White House. The book contained the most detailed account of December 8, 1941, including specific references to using special armor protection for the president's Capitol trip. Riley didn't explicitly name Capone's car, but the implication was clear. By the 1960s, the story had become part of Washington folklore. Tour guides mentioned it. Historians debated it. The Treasury Department continued refusing to confirm or deny. The problem with government secrecy is that it creates perfect conditions for legend to replace fact. Without official confirmation, the story grew more dramatic with each retelling. Some versions claimed Roosevelt knew about the car's history and found it amusing. Others suggested the entire Secret Service was embarrassed by the necessity. What we can confirm through declassified documents and participant accounts. The Secret Service needed armored transportation for Roosevelt's December 8 Capitol trip. Standard presidential vehicles lacked sufficient protection. The Treasury Department provided alternative transportation from seized asset inventory. That transportation successfully protected the president during his infamy speech. What remains disputed? Whether the alternative transportation was specifically Al Capone's personal Cadillac. Whether Roosevelt knew the car's history. Whether this was a one-time emergency use or part of ongoing wartime security measures. Modern historians have spent decades trying to verify the Capone car story. The evidence is compelling but not conclusive. Treasury Department records show that Al Capone's 1928 Cadillac was indeed seized following his conviction and stored at a Washington motor pool. The car's description in asset forfeiture documents matches FBI surveillance reports from Capone's Chicago operations. Secret Service records from December 1941 reference using special protective vehicles for presidential transportation during the Pearl Harbor crisis period. However, specific vehicle identification was classified and many relevant documents remained sealed. The strongest evidence comes from participant testimony. Multiple Secret Service agents, Treasury officials, and White House staff later confirmed that extraordinary security measures were implemented for Roosevelt's December 8 Capitol trip. Several specifically mentioned armor protection that wasn't part of standard presidential transportation. Dr. Robert Dallek, Roosevelt biographer and presidential historian, notes, "The Secret Service was genuinely concerned about assassination attempts following Pearl Harbor. They would have used any available protection, regardless of its source." Professor David M. Kennedy of Stanford University, author of Freedom from Fear, The American People in Depression and War, observes, "The story fits the patterns of wartime improvisation. Government agencies regularly appropriated civilian and criminal assets for military purposes after December 7th. Counter-evidence comes mainly from the lack of explicit documentation. No Treasury Department memo specifically states President Roosevelt will travel in Al Capone's former vehicle. No Secret Service report directly identifies the Cadillac by its criminal history. But this absence of explicit documentation doesn't disprove the story. Government agencies routinely avoid creating embarrassing written records, especially during national emergencies. The most convincing evidence may be circumstantial, the confluence of necessity, availability, and capability. The Secret Service needed armor. The Treasury had armor. The source of that armor was irrelevant compared to protecting the president during wartime. Whether or not Al Capone's Cadillac actually carried FDR to his infamous speech, the story reveals something profound about American democracy during crisis. The symbolism is almost overwhelming. Al Capone represented everything wrong with American society during the 1920s and early 1930s. Corruption, violence, contempt for law, criminal excess. He was the anti-citizen, the man who proved that crime could pay, that federal law was meaningless if you had enough money and guns. Franklin Roosevelt represented the opposite. Democracy, constitutional governance, moral leadership during crisis. He was the president who restored faith in American institutions, who led the nation through Depression and World War. Having these two figures connected, even tangentially, through 7,000 pounds of armored steel creates one of history's strangest partnerships. But the deeper irony is that Capone's engineering may have been exactly what democracy needed. The gangsters' paranoid security measures, designed to protect criminal activity, were repurposed to protect constitutional government. In essence, Al Capone's fear of assassination may have prevented the assassination of a president. That's the uncomfortable truth about desperate times. Survival trumps ideology. When democracy itself is under threat, even its protectors will use the tools of its enemies. The story also reveals how government bureaucracy handles moral complexity. Rather than acknowledge the ironic necessity of using criminal assets to protect the president, officials chose secrecy and denial. Better to let people speculate than admit that Al Capone had inadvertently helped save American democracy. What happened to Al Capone's Cadillac after December 8, 1941 is better documented than its alleged presidential service. Treasury records show the vehicle remained in government custody throughout World War II, occasionally used for high-security transportation when other armored vehicles were unavailable. Never again for presidential protection, but for other federal officials during particularly dangerous assignments. In 1945, with the war ending and government vehicle requirements changing, Treasury decided to dispose of the Capone Cadillac. The car was sold at federal surplus auction to a private collector for $3,700, a fraction of its original modification cost, but still substantial money for a used vehicle. The buyer was Anthony Capizio, a Chicago businessman with no known mob connections. Capizio apparently purchased the car as a curiosity, attracted by its notorious history rather than its protective capabilities. From 1945 to 1958, the Cadillac changed hands several times. Car collectors, novelty enthusiasts, people fascinated by gangster history. Each sale added to the car's legend and inflated its price. In 1958, the Cadillac was purchased by the Imperial Palace Casino in Las Vegas for their automobile collection. The casino's owner, Ralph Engelstad, specialized in historically significant vehicles. The Capone car became one of their star attractions. For decades, visitors to Las Vegas could see Al Capone's armored Cadillac in the Imperial Palace collection. Tour guides would tell its story, including the alleged FDR connection. The car became a tourist attraction, a piece of American criminal history preserved for public viewing. In 2017, the Imperial Palace closed and their vehicle collection was auctioned. The Capone Cadillac sold for $341,000 to an anonymous private collector. As of 2024, its location and condition remain unknown. But here's the remarkable thing about the car's journey. From criminal transportation to presidential protection to tourist attraction to private collection. Each phase reflected a different aspect of how America processes its criminal history. Al Capone built the car to protect himself from a violent world he'd helped create. The federal government used it to protect democracy from foreign attack. Private collectors preserved it as historical curiosity. Each use was legitimate within its context, even when that context shifted dramatically. The story of FDR and Capone's Cadillac, whether fully factual or partially legendary, illuminates a crucial moment in American history when traditional boundaries dissolved under crisis pressure. December 8, 1941 wasn't just about presidential transportation. It was about a democracy learning to fight total war against enemies who recognized no moral limitations. Within hours of Pearl Harbor, the federal government began implementing extraordinary measures. Japanese Americans were rounded up and interned. German and Italian nationals were detained for investigation. Civilian industries were converted to military production. Constitutional rights were suspended in the name of national security. Using a gangster's car to protect the president was minor compared to these other emergency measures. But it captured something essential about how crisis changes institutional behavior. Before Pearl Harbor, the idea of federal agents using criminal assets for official purposes would have been scandalous. After Pearl Harbor, it became routine. The military appropriated civilian ships, planes, and vehicles. Intelligence agencies recruited criminals as informants and operatives. Research programs employed scientists regardless of their political backgrounds or personal histories. War changed the rules. Survival became the priority. Everything else was negotiable. The Capone car story also reflects the unique position of organized crime in American society during the 1930s and 1940s. Gangsters weren't seen as foreign enemies or ideological threats. They were domestic criminals, certainly, but criminals who understood American values even when they violated American laws. Al Capone was a brutal murderer and a tax cheat, but he was also a patriotic American who supported his country during both world wars. When World War II started, many organized crime figures cooperated with federal intelligence agencies. Their criminal skills and international connections were valuable assets in fighting fascism. The government's willingness to use Capone's car reflected this complex relationship. Crime was a domestic problem that could be managed. Fascism was an existential threat that had to be destroyed. Priorities were clear. 70-plus years after December 8, 1941, the story of FDR and Al Capone's Cadillac continues raising questions about government, security, and moral compromise during crisis. Was it appropriate for the federal government to use criminal assets for presidential protection? Most historians say yes, given the circumstances. National security during wartime justifies extraordinary measures, especially when those measures don't compromise legal or ethical principles. Should the government have acknowledged using the car publicly? Opinions are divided. Transparency supporters argue that democracies should admit when they use unusual methods for legitimate purposes. Security experts respond that revealing protective details endangers future operations. Does the story's uncertain verification matter? Some argue that without definitive proof, the story should be treated as legend rather than history. Others contend that the story's symbolic truth is more important than its factual accuracy. What the story definitely reveals is how institutions adapt during crisis. The Secret Service faced an unprecedented challenge, and found an innovative solution. Whether that solution involved Al Capone's specific vehicle is less important than the willingness to think creatively about protection. The story also demonstrates how American democracy has consistently survived by combining idealistic principles with pragmatic implementation. The Constitution provides the framework, but survival often requires improvisation. Franklin Roosevelt understood this balance better than most presidents. He was simultaneously a defender of democratic values and a practitioner of political realism. Using whatever tools were necessary to preserve constitutional government was entirely consistent with his leadership philosophy. Whether he rode in Al Capone's armored Cadillac or not, Roosevelt would have approved of the decision. Democracy's survival was worth any temporary compromise of moral purity. So did President Roosevelt actually ride in Al Capone's armored Cadillac on December 8, 1941? The honest answer is, probably. The circumstantial evidence is overwhelming. The Secret Service needed armor protection immediately. The Treasury Department had exactly that protection in storage. The timing, necessity, and availability all aligned perfectly. Participant testimony consistently references extraordinary security measures and armor protection that wasn't part of standard presidential transportation. Multiple sources confirm that special vehicles were used during the Pearl Harbor crisis period. The main argument against the story is the lack of explicit documentation, but that absence reflects government classification policies rather than fictional origin. Embarrassing operational details are routinely kept secret, especially during national emergencies. What matters more than absolute verification is what the story tells us about American democracy during crisis. When faced with existential threats, democratic institutions have consistently proven willing to use whatever tools are necessary for survival. Al Capone was a murderous criminal who corrupted American cities for over a decade. But his armored Cadillac represented something more: the technological innovation, engineering excellence, and protective capability that America needed during its darkest hour. Whether FDR actually rode in that specific car, the President of the United States was protected by principles and methods that originated in the criminal underworld. Democracy survived by temporarily adopting the security measures of its domestic enemies. That's not a scandal. It's a testament to the flexibility, adaptability, and ultimate strength of American institutions. The story of FDR's secret shield reveals that democracy's greatest weapon isn't moral purity. It's the willingness to do whatever is necessary to preserve constitutional government, even when that necessity requires uncomfortable compromises. On December 8, 1941, America's democracy was tested by foreign attack and domestic uncertainty. It survived by being practical rather than idealistic, by choosing effectiveness over appearances, by using every available tool to protect the principles that mattered most. Whether Al Capone's Cadillac actually carried Franklin Roosevelt to his infamy speech, the president was certainly protected by the same combination of innovation, determination, and moral flexibility that has always characterized American democracy at its best. That's the real lesson of this story. Not whether government officials should acknowledge using unusual methods, but whether democratic societies can maintain their values while adapting their practices to meet unprecedented challenges. History suggests the answer is yes. Democracy survives not by maintaining perfect moral consistency, but by consistently protecting the freedoms that make moral debate possible in the first place. Al Capone's armored Cadillac, whether it actually protected FDR or not, has become a symbol of that survival. 7,000 pounds of criminal engineering repurposed for constitutional protection. A fortress built by America's most notorious gangster, used to defend America's most important democratic institution. It's the perfect metaphor for how democracy really works. Messily, pragmatically, but ultimately effectively. If you found this deep dive into one of American history's strangest partnerships compelling, hit subscribe. We release new documentaries every week exploring the untold stories where crime, politics, and history intersect in ways that changed everything. Drop a comment below. Should the government have publicly acknowledged using Al Capone's car to protect FDR? Or are some necessities better kept secret? Let's debate the ethics of survival in democracy's darkest hours. Because sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. And sometimes the strangest truths reveal the deepest realities about how power, protection, and principles intersect when everything is at stake.